She walked into the marble-floored bank on a Tuesday afternoon, carrying a designer handbag and wearing a tailored navy suit that spoke of success. The card in her wall, it wasn't just any credit card. It was black, sleek, and carried a weight that most people would never understand. But the man behind the counter, with his pressed white shirt and condescending smile, took one look at her and decided he knew everything he needed to know. He glanced at the card she placed on the counter, then back at her face, and let out a small laugh that would change everything. What happened in the next 7 minutes would not only cost him his career, but reveal a connection so shocking that security footage from that day would be reviewed by corporate executives across 3 states. The card she handed him wasn't stolen, it wasn't fake, and when he ran it through the system, his face went from smug superiority to pure terror in less than 5 seconds. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're watching from New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, London, Manchester, or anywhere else in the world, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. This story spread across social media within hours, and people from dozens of countries weighed in on what they would have done in this situation. Drop your city below and hit that like button, because what you're about to hear is something that actually happened, and it's going to make you question everything you think you know about judgment and consequences. She had been banking with this particular branch for exactly 3 weeks. Her name was Dr. Maya Thompson, though most people never bothered to ask for her credentials before making assumptions. She held 2 master's degrees, a doctorate in biochemical engineering, and had recently sold her patent for a revolutionary water purification system to a multinational corporation for an amount that would make most people's heads spin. The sale had closed 47 days earlier, and her financial advisor had recommended she diversify her banking relationships, which is why she found herself standing in this particular branch on Lexington Avenue at 2:15 in the afternoon. The bank itself was one of those institutions that prided itself on serving high-net-worth individuals. The lobby featured imported Italian marble, fresh orchids replaced daily, and wealth management offices with frosted glass doors. She had already completed most of her accounts set up online, but there were documents that required physical signatures, and she needed to activate a new platinum debit card that had arrived at this branch instead of her home address due to a processing error. He was standing behind the main customer service counter when she approached. His nameplate read Derek Morrison, Senior Banking Associate, and he had been with the institution for 11 years. Those 11 years had given him what he considered an expert eye for reading clients. He could tell within 30 seconds, he often bragged to colleagues, whether someone was worth his time or just wasting it. He had a particular system for categorizing customers, though he would never admit this system aloud in any official capacity. When she approached his counter, he had already placed her in a category before she even opened her mouth. She smiled politely and placed her identification and the credit card on the counter. The card was a Centurion card, known in banking circles as the Black Card, issued by American Express. These cards weren't available through normal applications. They were invitation only, typically extended to individuals who charged and paid off at least $250,000 annually on other premium cards. The annual fee alone was $5,000, and the card came with benefits that included personal concierge services, access to private airport lounges worldwide, and complimentary companion airline tickets on international flights. He looked at the card, then at her, then back at the card. His expression shifted into something between amusement and disbelief. He picked up the card with 2 fingers, as if it might be contaminated, holding it up to the light and examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. She watched this performance with a calm expression, having unfortunately encountered this type of reception before, though never quite this blatant. He set the card down and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. His voice carried across the quiet banking floor when he spoke, loud enough that 2 other customers turned to look. He asked her where she got this card from, his tone making it clear he believed he already knew the answer and it wasn't legitimate. She responded evenly that it was her card, issued to her name, and she was here to complete some banking transactions and pick up her new debit card that had been mistakenly delivered to this branch. He shook his head slowly, that condescending smile still fixed on his face. He told her that he had been in banking for over a decade, and he knew what these cards looked like. He said he also knew the kind of people who carried them, and he was going to need to verify this card before he could proceed with anything. The way he emphasized verify and kind of people made his implications crystal clear to everyone within earshot. She took a slow breath and asked him to proceed with whatever verification he needed to do. She placed her driver's license on the counter next to the card. Her voice remained steady, professional, though something flickered in her eyes that suggested she was running calculations of her own. He picked up her license, glanced at it briefly, and set it aside as if it proved nothing. He then did something that would later be described in the incident report as highly irregular and completely outside standard banking protocol. He picked up his desk phone and called over to another associate, speaking loudly enough that she and several other customers could hear every word. He told his colleague that he had a situation that needed attention, that someone had come in with what appeared to be a fraudulent premium credit card, and he wanted a witness before he called security. She didn't move, didn't raise her voice, didn't show any of the anger that was certainly building behind her composed exterior. She simply asked him if he was refusing to serve her, and if she needed to speak with a manager. He laughed at that, actually laughed, and told her that he was more than qualified to handle this situation, and that getting a manager involved would only make things more complicated for her. The other associate he had called over arrived at the counter, a younger woman who looked uncomfortable the moment she assessed the situation. He showed her the black card and made a comment about how some people would try anything these days, complete with a meaningful look that made his implications about exactly which people he meant absolutely explicit. That's when she said something that would later be quoted in multiple news articles and social media posts. She told him calmly that she was going to give him one more opportunity to process her transaction professionally, or she would be making a phone call of her own. She said this not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact, the way someone might mention they were going to check the weather or order lunch. He responded by reaching for his computer keyboard with theatrical slowness, making it clear he was humoring her, but fully expected the card to be declined or flagged as stolen. He asked for her full name, which she provided. He asked for the last 4 digits of her social security number, which she provided. Then he slid the black card through his reader and typed in several commands. What happened next took approximately 4 seconds, but those 4 seconds seemed to stretch out as everyone watched his face transform. The screen in front of him loaded, and his expression went from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to shock, and finally to something that looked like genuine fear. His hands froze above the keyboard. The color drained from his face so quickly that the other associate asked if he was okay. He didn't answer. His eyes were locked on his screen, scanning back and forth, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. She watched him calmly, that same composed expression never wavering. She asked if there was a problem with her card. He didn't respond immediately. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. When he finally spoke, his voice had completely changed. Gone was the condescending tone, replaced by something that sounded like panic barely held in check. He stammered out that he needed to excuse himself for just one moment and pushed back from his desk so quickly that his chair rolled into the wall behind him. The other associate looked between him and the customer, clearly confused about what had just transpired. But she knew. She had seen this reaction twice before, though never quite this dramatic. She settled her handbag more comfortably on her shoulder and waited. Through the frosted glass of one of the wealth management offices, raised voices could be heard, though the words weren't distinct. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Other customers in line were starting to murmur and check their watches. When he returned, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a woman in an expensive gray suit, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes sharp and assessing. This was Patricia Chen, the branch manager, and she approached the counter with the kind of smooth authority that comes from 2 decades of handling sensitive situations. She introduced herself and asked if they could continue this conversation in her office. She agreed and followed the branch manager, while the senior banking associate trailed behind them, looking like a man walking to his own execution. Once inside the office with the door closed, the branch manager gestured to a leather chair and took her own seat behind an impressive mahogany desk. The senior banking associate remained standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The branch manager began carefully, saying she understood there had been some confusion about account verification. She started with the safe language, the diplomatic phrasing designed to diffuse situations without admitting fault. But she interrupted, her voice still calm but now carrying an edge that could cut glass. She said there had been no confusion. She said what had happened was discrimination, pure and simple, and it had happened in full view of other customers. The senior banking associate tried to speak up, claiming he was just following security protocols, but the branch manager held up one hand to silence him. She kept her eyes on the customer and asked her to explain exactly what had occurred. So she did, laying out the sequence of events in precise, chronological order, noting his specific comments, his tone, his decision to call over a witness before calling security, and his refusal to conduct standard verification procedures. The branch manager's expression grew more serious with each detail. When the recounting was finished, she turned to her employee and asked if this was accurate. He stumbled through a response that amounted to yes, but tried to frame it as reasonable caution. The branch manager cut him off again and told him to wait outside her office. Once he was gone, the branch manager's professional mask slipped slightly. She apologized, not with corporate speak, but with what seemed like genuine dismay. She said this was unacceptable and would be addressed through official channels. Then she asked what she could do to make this right. She responded that she wanted what she had come here for in the first place: her transactions processed, her documents signed, and her new debit card activated. She wanted to be treated like any other customer, which shouldn't have been too much to ask. The branch manager nodded and said she would personally handle everything. She pulled up the account on her computer, and as she did, something on the screen made her pause. She looked at the screen, then at the customer, then back at the screen. She asked, in a carefully controlled voice, if the customer was the doctor, Maya Thompson, who had recently completed a significant transaction that had been coordinated through their corporate wealth management division. She confirmed that yes, she was. The branch manager's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up additional screens. Her eyes widened slightly as she read. Then she asked another question, her voice even more careful now. She asked if the customer was aware that one of the accounts linked to her profile was actually a joint account that had been opened 27 years earlier. She said yes, she was aware. That account had been opened by her grandmother, who had added her as a joint holder when she was 16 years old, as a way to teach her about financial responsibility. She had kept the account active over the years out of sentimental value, even though the balance was minimal. Her grandmother had passed away 8 years ago, but she couldn't bring herself to close it. The branch manager nodded slowly, pulling up another screen. Then she asked if the customer knew that this particular account had been set up with some unusual authorizations. Specifically, it had been configured so that any joint holder could access and manage certain linked accounts if specific criteria were met. These configurations had been part of a legacy banking product that the institution no longer offered but still honored for existing accounts. She said she was vaguely aware her grandmother had set up something complex, but she had never looked into the details. She had her own accounts now and didn't need to use that old joint account for anything. The branch manager was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight that suggested she was about to reveal something significant. She explained that the system had flagged something when the senior banking associate had run the verification on the black card. The account linked to that card included multiple profiles and authentication pathways, as was standard for their premium services. However, when he had entered the verification commands, the system had cross-referenced all associated accounts, including that old joint account. And that joint account had a secondary authorization that had apparently never been removed or updated. She asked what kind of secondary authorization. The branch manager turned her screen around so the customer could see it. There, listed in the account hierarchy, was a name that made everything suddenly make sense. The secondary authorization name was Derek Morrison, the same Derek Morrison who had just spent 10 minutes humiliating her in the lobby. She stared at the screen, processing this information. She asked how that was possible. The branch manager explained that based on the documentation, when the account had been originally established, her grandmother had been working as a domestic employee for the Morrison family. As part of her compensation package, the family had arranged for her to open an account at this institution, which was typically reserved for wealthier clients. To facilitate this, a family member had been listed as a secondary authorization, essentially vouching for the account. That family member had been Derek Morrison's grandfather. Over the decades, as the account changed hands and banking systems were updated and merged, that secondary authorization had remained in the system, buried in legacy code that modern software still recognized even though the relationship was functionally meaningless. When he had run her verification, the system had identified him not just as the banking associate processing the transaction, but as someone with a historic administrative connection to one of her accounts. She sat back in her chair, and for the first time since walking into the bank, she laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or an angry laugh, but genuine amusement at the cosmic irony of it all. She said that her grandmother had worked for his family, had saved every penny, had built something from nothing, and had passed down not just money but values and connections that had helped create the success she now enjoyed. And here was the grandson of that family, working as a bank employee, trying to humiliate her over a credit card he didn't believe she could possibly deserve. The branch manager looked uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. She continued, saying that her grandmother used to tell her stories about the Morrison family. They had been wealthy, yes, but not particularly kind. They had paid minimum wage and expected maximum loyalty. Her grandmother had taken that job because she needed it, had endured condescension and casual racism because she had to, but she had also quietly saved and invested and built something that they never expected her to achieve. And now, 3 generations later, the granddaughter of their domestic worker held accounts that dwarfed anything the Morrison grandson could access. She carried cards he would never qualify for. She had sold a patent for more money than he would likely earn in his entire career. And when he had looked at her, all he had seen was someone to demean, never imagining that their family's histories were literally intertwined in the banking system he thought he controlled. The branch manager asked what she wanted to happen next. She considered this carefully. She could file a formal complaint. She could go to the media. She could demand his termination. All of these options were on the table, and the branch manager's nervous expression suggested she knew it. But she had learned something from her grandmother about playing the long game. She said she wanted a formal apology documented in writing. She wanted confirmation that he would undergo comprehensive bias training. She wanted assurance that this incident would be part of his permanent employee record. And she wanted one more thing. She wanted her grandmother's name added to a plaque in the lobby, recognizing long-time customers who had helped build the institution. Her grandmother had been a customer for over 30 years before her death, and that deserved recognition. The branch manager agreed immediately to all of these terms. She would personally oversee the implementation. She asked if the customer wanted to be present when the senior banking associate was informed of the disciplinary actions. She declined. She said she didn't need to see his face again. She had made her point, and more importantly, she had honored her grandmother's memory in a way that actually mattered. As she stood to leave, having finally completed the transactions she had come there to do in the first place, the branch manager said something that seemed genuine rather than corporate. She said that she wished the customer's grandmother could have seen what she had become, what she had achieved. She smiled at that and said her grandmother had seen it. She had lived long enough to know that her granddaughter had gotten into graduate school, had started showing promise in her field. She died believing that the sacrifices had been worth it, and that belief had been absolutely correct. She walked out of that office, through the marble lobby, past the counter where he still sat looking shocked, and out into the afternoon sunlight. 3 days later, she received a formal letter of apology from the bank, along with documentation that all her requested terms had been met. 2 weeks after that, she received a photo of a small brass plaque that had been mounted in the lobby, listing her grandmother's name among other honored long-term customers. The story spread quickly once word got out. Banking industry insiders shared it as a cautionary tale about assumptions and prejudice. Social media users debated what justice should look like in these situations. Some said she should have pushed for termination. Others said she had taken the high road and created something meaningful from a degrading experience. The truth, as she saw it, was simpler than either extreme. She had recognized an opportunity to educate rather than simply punish, to honor her grandmother's legacy rather than just seeking revenge, and to demonstrate that true power isn't about destruction, but about choosing your battles and your responses with intention. Derek Morrison remained employed at the bank, but his career trajectory had been permanently altered. The incident report would follow him through any future applications or promotions. The bias training he underwent was extensive and uncomfortable, forcing him to confront assumptions he had carried for years. Whether he truly learned from the experience or simply learned to hide his prejudices better was something only time would tell. As for her, she continued building on the foundation her grandmother had helped create. She invested her patent earnings into scholarship funds for first-generation college students studying STEM fields. She spoke at conferences about both her scientific work and about the hidden barriers that still exist in professional spaces. And she kept that old joint account open, maintaining a small balance, letting it serve as a reminder of where she came from and what her grandmother had endured to make her success possible. The black card remained in her wallet, but she rarely thought about it as anything other than a tool. The real wealth, she understood now more than ever, wasn't in the card or the accounts or even the patent sale. It was in the lesson her grandmother had taught her about dignity, perseverance, and the long game. It was in knowing that success built on someone else's sacrifice carries a responsibility to honor that sacrifice by building something even better for the next generation. She never returned to that particular bank branch. She didn't need to. The point had been made, the lesson delivered, and her grandmother's name was on the wall. Sometimes that's exactly enough. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment about whether you think she handled this the right way or what you would have done differently. And remember, the assumptions we make about people based on appearance, age, race, or gender reveal far more about us than they ever reveal about them. The next time you're tempted to judge someone's worth by what you see on the surface, remember the banker who thought he knew everything about the woman in front of him, right up until the moment the system revealed just how wrong he actually was.